Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Carrot Podcast, a bi-weekly discussion I have with leaders building the green economy, where we gain insights on where we stand today and what is just around the corner. I'm Ian McKee, the president of Carrot, a platform that brings together scientists, technologists, and financiers on the one hand, and environmental workers and project developers on the other, and where we work together to identify investable projects and solutions that can accelerate the transition to the circular, sustainable economy. Today, we're going to be speaking with Janek, a person I deeply admire. He is a zero pollution policy manager at Zero Waste Europe, a nonprofit organization based in Brussels, Belgium, and is a leading voice globally on zero waste. He's been at the center of the European debates on waste incineration, or waste to energy, mixed waste sorting, renewable energy policy, air quality, and methane. He has led policy coalitions, engaged directly with EU institutions, supported national advocacy efforts, and helped shape how Europe thinks today about zero waste. Janek, it's wonderful to have you here, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Ian, so much for the invitation. And it's really good to be here and have this conversation about zero waste.
Wonderful. We had the opportunity to be together recently at COP30 in Belém, and it was wonderful to be together, but also to see how zero waste is finally becoming part of a climate and policy debate globally. And I think this is going to be a really rich conversation. I think a lot of people are curious about what zero waste is. Few really understand it. So who better to talk about this than with you? And Janek, I'd like to say just that the reason why I chose zero waste as our first podcast is because, to me, waste is the purest manifestation of our inefficiency globally, right? Our global economy's inefficiency. It's everybody can connect with it because you can see it, right? The impact that it's having on us and on nature, and it's something that everyone can clearly see, touch, and ultimately understand as a problem that needs to be addressed. So I think this is a fundamental problem, and I think I'm, bringing this perspective, your perspective on how zero waste can change the course is going to be exciting. So first, Janek, thank you for joining us again. And could you please just tell us what zero waste is and what the opportunity really is here?
Yeah, I indeed, I think the term has been misused or even abused sometimes. So first of all, I'm zero waste is not about not having waste ever. So it's more like a system approach. And we are following Zero Waste International Alliance definition of zero waste, which basically defines zero waste as a conservation of resources. It's by means of responsible production and of course consumption, but also reuse and recovery of products, on packaging and also materials, and basically without relying to burning or discharges to land, water, air, so that there will be no threat to the environment or human health. So the focus is really here about the kind of system approach. And the focus is on preventing waste and on designing products, first of all, so that they can be reused or repaired and recycled. And of course, for the waste that still exists, the goal is to keep it as small as possible. So we are talking about zero waste cities when they reach sort of 90% of materials are actually used and only very little is disposed in landfills, for example. And in this work, we are guided by zero waste hierarchy. It's also something that the Zero Waste Alliance, International Alliance, has developed. It was recently, let's say, redefined. And in that zero waste hierarchy, the focus is really mostly on refuse and kind of rethinking and redesigning the products before we talk about even reuse or recycling. And then the last bit is really defining what is undesirable, and that means, for example, burning and landfilling, which sits at the very bottom of that hierarchy. I think it's important to say that for us, zero waste is not as a goal. It's more like a travel. So it's traveling together with the community members, with the people, and improving the systems over the time. And so it's not really so about that we're not at some point we're not going to have any waste at all. It's really about improving the systems and working together with the community members and politicians. And it's really about moving in the right direction step by step. And in terms of opportunities, since you asked, there are what I really like about zero waste approach. It's very much it's not a techno fix, so it's really focused on working with the people, creating local jobs, making communities healthier and more resilient. It's particularly relevant in the context, for example, of the crises we have had recently, such as COVID. It became very obvious that this long distance production and trading is very vulnerable. So we need to have something much more local, and it's also good for climate.
No, amazing. And I think, well, when you say the number 90%, right, recovery and reuse, I think people get shocked. So it's not zero in the sense that you're going to do it 100%. And I know most certifications of zero waste start at 90% as the minimum requirement
Yeah.
to be able to be certified. So there's just such a huge opportunity to advance on zero waste that most people just can't imagine that it's possible. So that's very helpful. Thank you for that. And how do you think we got here? Why do you think we are so inefficient in our waste management today, or in our resource management today, that we have this, in a way, a big waste services industry that is still designed to essentially either bury or incinerate? And what is really preventing us from moving to greater circularity, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think first of all we moved away from I don't know when I was a child in Estonia. I was born in Estonia. We generated very little waste because everything was reused or recycled. Most actually reused. I remember bringing myself the empty water bottles or or some other things back to the shop, and we got money for that. So it existed already, very long time ago. Because I'm now 48, so I'm talking about when I was maybe 7 years old, or even less. So we have built the current system is very much about throwaway products, and there are mainly three main problems. So first of all, the products are very badly designed. They are often just for single use and hard to recycle. That's the biggest problem, I would say. And then when it comes to the solutions, then too much is locked into the very end of the cycle. We're not really talking about even the cycle, because we're talking about incinerating and landfilling. So if you, for example, you mentioned the COP30 in Brazil, very important event, and I was very happy to be there. They launched a report on global methane status report, where they mentioned that 94% of finance in the last few years have been mostly going to incineration globally, mostly private finance. So just think about it, 94%. And out of that, of 4 billions that was dedicated to waste management, only about 22 million went into bio-waste management, organics management. So we are really talking about just focusing on the wrong things. And I think it's the last bit is also very important, is that the virgin materials are still much cheaper than the recycled ones. We are actually facing now a big crisis in Europe. It's mainly due to the fact that we of course we have a war here, which has made our price to skyrocket, but also a lot of cheap virgin materials are coming from other regions, and so we are not just able to compete with those. And so a lot of recycling facilities are closing down nowadays. So yeah, this is one of the big issues also that we are facing. All this makes that the system kind of pushes down the waste down the hierarchy, and we end up just really focusing on burning or dumping.
No, it's terrible to be hearing about this, and one of our great theses is that if you don't put a price on waste, right? If you can't introduce new capital into this segment, we're going to continue to stay in this linear economy. And yeah, so I can totally understand that, and we need to be more creative, perhaps, about introducing new ideas to put a price on this pollution and bring in new capital. So thank you for that. And one lovely slogan that has always been around in zero waste is no bury, no burn, right?
Yeah.
And on the bury, we can all understand, right? It makes no sense for us to be putting these materials or even bio waste underground. It just, or in an enclosed situation. So that's just awful. But people, there's been an entire new industry that's been built on the no burn side, right? The waste to incineration. And you spend a lot of time in this. You're probably the biggest voice globally on this subject. Could you please tell us a little bit about your work there and what you see for the resistance, or let's say for the future of this industry?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked. It's yeah, I've been now 10 years with Zero Waste Europe, and a lot of my time goes into really into the issue of no burn, so called. And it's been very interesting how also the policies and the narratives are changing. Indeed, actually, when it comes to the industry, they never talk about incineration. They don't call it incineration. They call it waste to energy. They call it valorization. They call it many different things. So, and sometimes when because I'm contacted, as you said, like I'm one of the focal points on the issue, and I get a lot of people, really kind of sending me desperate emails saying like, this project is planned in my region. For example, yesterday, an email from the Northern Ireland. But also from even from Brazil, for example, and the narrative has been changing a lot over the last 10 years, even. So historically, the focus has been really like the incineration was really competing with a sort of like a recycling, and it was almost at the same level historically. And then slowly the policy has started to move away from waste incineration in Europe. And what is interesting is also the focuses and the narratives around incineration. So when I started, the focus was very much on how waste incineration, for example, impacts a circular economy. So circular economy is a very hype topic here since 2017, I think so, quite recent actually. So, but more recently, the focus has been really on the climate impact of incineration, because the climate has become an important topic in Europe. Europe tries to be, especially now with the US. I think today was cancelled their participation in climate negotiations. Now the Europe is seen as a kind of taking on the role of the US more and more, and the climate is really important issue in Europe. And the impact of incinerators is that the emissions have been over the last few years, like over the last 10 years, really grown a lot. The emissions have more than doubled. So we are talking about a huge impact coming from burning of waste. And another issue is also important is that for quite some years, incineration and it's in many places still considered as safe, especially considering the European standards. But now there have been like new research coming up, which uses innovative ways of measuring contamination around incineration facilities, which shows that actually the immediate surrounding around incinerators gets contaminated. And sometimes if you grow your food around, so let's say like certain types of vegetables or fruits, they also get contaminated with the dioxins and some other persistent organic pollutants. If you are, let's say, like around 3 kilometers distance from incinerators, so there are different concerns about it, about the burning waste. And maybe just to say, like from Zero Waste Europe perspective, we are strongly against. So it's not part of our approach to waste management.
And what's, I think, most troubling is that we're losing all of these valuable resources through the
Yeah,
incineration process, right? I think it was
absolutely.
in one of your reports too. when you talk about it being an energy solution, right, or a green energy solution in some way, and then you compare it to other types of energy production, um, from what I understand, it's very inefficient way of generating energy, right?
Absolutely.
And it's completely subsidized because the incinerators are gaining the tipping fees, right?
Yes.
As a part of the process, then it's generating, this power in a very inefficient way, like organic waste. It's like basically water, so you're incinerating water. And then on the
Yeah.
other hand, and then finally, you're producing most of this energy, or a lot of the energy. Let's say 50% of it is then heat, right? Which in many
Yeah.
locations can't even be really
Exactly.
applied. So it seems to me like it's a lose lose on many different fronts, and yet it's still being used and competing against zero waste and circularity, right? And I think
Absolutely.
those are like the things that stick in mind with me. Is just like, why are we still talking about this? And do you see any changes in terms of sort of carbon finance or the regulated markets with regard to the waste to energy projects?
Yeah, indeed, and I also just to comment the issue of indeed when we look at the composition of waste, then what is incinerated but also landfilled today is actually mostly recyclable, and there's been a lot of studies not just from us but also from some industries who are interested in looking into the mixed waste which is currently incinerated, and they found that at least half of it is recyclable. And I think there was a study from UK government, DEFRA, one of the departments. They found that up to 85% was recyclable. Not all of it was like easily recyclable, but it was recyclable, and only 15% was sort of really residual, so you couldn't do anything with it, and that's why you either needed to kind of burn or landfill it. When it comes to the policy, there has been a lot of changes since 2016, when the Commission put out the first communication on waste to energy, in particularly looking at from the from the perspective of circular economy, and they started to they basically advised member states to put a moratorium on incinerators, and currently you asked about the climate. The currently Commission is working on a proposal to include waste incinerators as part of the so-called emission trading scheme. So what it does is that once they include it, it would penalize the emission of particularly fossil CO2, and we know that at least half of the emissions are from burning plastics and other synthetic, textiles, for example, and packaging. So yeah, it would have a huge impact on waste incineration, and really, I think it's kind of historic because it will make it double the price it is now, and therefore really give a very strong incentive for countries to stop burning it. So that's what we're hoping, and that's going to happen around mid 2026. So I'm very much looking forward to this moment when the Commission will finally publish the proposal.
So this is this year. That's significant. And Janek, how are they going to address this? Is this more of like a tax or a fee that would be paid on a per ton release, or would they have to be buying or carbon credit offsets? How is this going to work?
Yeah, so it's a cap and trade system, meaning that there is a like overall cap defined, like how many millions tons of CO2 could be emitted overall, and then the facilities they might get some allowances, sort of like for certain amount they are allowed to emit. We are trying to phase out those free allowances because it's in the end, you really have to stop emitting. But well, we understand that historically there was a maybe some kind of justification for that. But yeah, and then once you don't have allowances, you basically for every ton of fossil fuel you emit, you pay a price, and it's currently. I think it's. I'm not sure what is it exactly today, but it's around like 83 euros per ton of fossil CO2. So it's significant. So just to think about, if you take an average facility in Europe, it's about 200,000 tons of of waste burned, and so it will cost an incinerator roughly between 5 to 8 million tons of no 5 to 8 million euros extra per year. So it's quite significant in terms of as a cost.
Oh, there's a significant incentive to reduce. That's great. And you bring up the issue of climate change in general, right? We just broached that. Um, do you believe? I mean, from where I stand, waste management has suddenly become a major climate change solution, right? And this is really maybe even the legacy of 2025. We were together at COP at the super pollutant um, pavilion, and it seems to me like now all of a sudden, the worlds have kind of collided, right? We're talking about climate change and we're talking about resource management, and specifically about methane. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about methane in particular. For those who don't know, methane is released when organic waste is essentially buried in a landfill. In that anaerobic state without oxygen is producing the methane. At best, capture solutions are around the 50 percentile of what is produced is being captured or utilized. And methane, again, is responsible for 30% roughly of global warming. And biowaste as a whole, as a category, represents 25% of that amount if you include manure. And stopping methane release is one of the fastest way of preventing global warming. So with this whole change in perspective, what do you think this is going to mean for waste management globally, and what can you expect that could happen here?
Yeah, it's indeed it's very interesting. Again, looking at how the certain narratives and policies develop. First of all, I mean, nobody really care about landfills, especially in Europe. When we look at just before, like maybe 5 6 years ago, suddenly they started to talk about the methane, and the landfills again became important because they produce they generate a lot of methane, especially if you landfill directly organic waste. Organic waste, I mean the kitchen waste and anything that decomposes organically and can produce methane. So yeah, it's very interesting that suddenly landfills are again in part of the conversation. First of all, and it's very interesting. Also, it creates new opportunities for us to talk about, of course, reducing landfilling and doing actually not just from the zero waste perspective. We're not so much interested like what is landfill, but preventing landfilling in the first place. So it's an opportunity for us to do more about the proper management of organics, so kitchen waste, and also the garden waste. So in Europe, it's defined, bio-waste is defined as having these two different elements. So you have like kitchen waste, so it's whatever potato peels and some food leftovers, and then you have also garden waste. So if you have a garden, or so for example, if you cut your lawn, then all this is considered as a garden waste. And honestly, we have a mandatory collection since 2024, and unfortunately, not a lot of it is happening. We just did a report when we saw that only 26% of food waste is collected in Europe on average. Much more garden waste. Actually, member states sometimes, because it's easier to cut the grass and then put it in the bags and send it to a facility. So they tend to over-report on the garden waste and not too much about the kitchen waste. But the kitchen waste is actually particularly problematic because it's the wet waste, and if you landfill that creates a lot of methane. So it's a new opportunity for us actually to do something about it, to improve systems, and then make a case for better management of organics. So I see it as and also of course globally, it's a huge kind of opportunity now to do something about it. And I just want to also stress that proper management of organics is really, really important, because it's once you separate this kind of wet, humid waste from rest of the materials, then the other materials, they can also be more easily recycled or even reused. So it's actually really important, and it's also important because in most countries it's actually the largest fraction of waste. So I think in Brazil, I'm not sure how much it is, but it's I know, I think in many of the countries it's around 50-60% of the waste generated by households and um, and the similar
Yeah.
producers.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. We talk about really low recycling rates globally, right? Like just, we're
Yeah.
talking about 15% globally in the global south or in in developing countries, it's way below that. And 50% of that waste in general globally is organic waste. And all of it practically is ending up in landfills. I mean, in the global south, it's less than 1%, right? So
Yeah.
if it's 100% recyclable, and we're recycling less than 1%, what an opportunity to change that. And there's one thing you said to me at COP30, or one quote, sorry, that you left that I will never forget. But we're talking about specifically this problem, right? How do you
Mhm.
sort this organic waste and you get it to proper biological treatment? And you said there's currently no way to finance bio-waste collection in Europe. And if we look to Europe as a model for the world, right? Um,
Yeah.
it's quite concerning.
Mm.
And what do you think about that? I mean, I still have this idea that maybe solutions that are going to be happening in other areas new models might actually contribute perhaps to even places that today are really kind of stuck in their ways without really evolving, like in Europe perhaps. But that phrase, that one quote that you left, really stuck with me. What do what do you think? Why is that?
Yes. So when it comes to kitchen waste or and the organics in general, I'm talking about also garden waste. It's now. I mean, thanks to yeah, God, I mean, in Europe at least, municipalities, they have some money. So it comes from the cities and municipalities budget, but it comes as an extra cost, meaning that they would have to then take it from the overall budget and spend it on collecting and treating. So that's one of the main reasons why there is a little interest also in doing it, because it's just an extra cost, and we're talking about the biggest fraction of waste overall. So it's very, very important actually. But it's one of the few waste streams that doesn't have kind of like a EPR scheme. When I say EPR, I refer to the extended producer responsibility. Basically, normally the producers of products, they contribute to a budget with fees. So in this case, we don't have anything. So the cities, they have to finance the collection. So we have a little bit similar now for the textiles also. We have a textiles mandatory collection from 2025, and we don't see much happening because at the moment there is also no financing attached to it. Luckily, the European institutions, they just decided that to introduce EPR fees from 2028. So in a few years' time, we will have a EPR fees helping with the collection and treatment of textile waste. But we have nothing at the moment for the bio waste. So it's really a problem. But we are also thinking on solutions. So if you, yeah, happy to share about it.
Yeah, no, I'd love to hear more about this because, we need to find new ways of bringing in money to solve this problem, right? And I think that a lot of the solutions that can be involve solving bio waste in particular, they can be centralized or decentralized or a combination of both, right? And EPR programs, extended producer responsibility, which essentially makes the producers contribute some capital into recovering and recycling these materials, is one of the fastest growing regulatory frameworks globally, and has never been done for bio waste, which is 50%. So I'm with you. I'm shocked that nobody has done this before. We are directly involved in creating mechanisms so that EPR for bio waste can be enabled. So bio waste recycling credits, where you can certify bio waste diversion from landfills. And they introduce that into sort of EPR programs so that they can be they can be born. So I'm super glad you brought that up. I'm really hopeful that we see EPR coming to biowaste recycling and diversion. But going back a little bit to the first step, I think you're talking about financing the sorting of organic waste and getting it to biological treatment so that it doesn't end up in a landfill or an incinerator. And there's one thing that is often discussed where new money is coming into the waste sector, and it's through carbon credits issued at landfills from methane recovery or utilization and destruction. Um, and I'd like to get your perspective on this, on a zero waste perspective, and what this does to the system. And then we can dive a little bit deeper of maybe how we can look at it from a different perspective, that it could actually be used in a more beneficial manner.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, at least in Europe, we are not really looking into the methane credits or the carbon credits, because I think what we would like to have is something kind of like a sustainable long-term finance, because these projects, they tend to be one-off often. So I think we have seen a lot of projects that where you start up something, and then when the project finishes, the credit finishes, then it's sort of like it collapses. So in Europe, we are really trying to find a more like, we're looking into more into EPR schemes, because and we are considering doing something on the food products. So basically, the food producers would pay for a small fee. It's either it's not necessarily like the farmers. We don't think of penalizing farmers for producing the food. That's not the idea. It's really um, the wholesale and maybe big retailers and so on. But when it comes to the methane credits, so there are, let's say, like some positive sides, and particularly in places where there's no finance available, and I think that's actually most of the world. So I think in there it could play a role, but to get started. But I would say it should be always something temporary, because the threats, particularly when it comes to the management of organics, is that if you start, it has to be well designed. So what you don't want to have is to sort of finance keeping landfills open for longer, because organics is ending up in there, and then you try to capture, for example, the methane from that process. Um, or you also don't want that this system kind of reduces the pressure for to separate waste in the first place, and of course pay for the pollution that shouldn't exist in the first place. So it really has to be well designed, that the money goes into the management of organics, rather than when it ends up in landfills, and therefore try to capture methane from that process. So yeah, from our perspective, it should really pay for prevention, and not for cleaning up kind of avoidable emissions.
Yeah, and once you get that bio waste out of a landfill
Mm.
and into biological treatment, right? What you've actually successfully done is you've prevented that methane, and then you've removed the need, let's say, for the credits themselves, if you have something to offload that onto, right? So yeah, I think there's a real opportunity here for the combination of both perhaps methane finance for the diversion and the building of the bio waste treatment industry, as long as you can offset, not offset, sorry, if you can offload that onto, say, an EPR policy, right? Because then now you have, now you have real regulation that can last forever, and it doesn't depend really on the volatility, let's say, of carbon pricing and everything else. So, cool. I totally agree with that, and I hope we're able to contribute that in a way. And I think, the thing that I think I'd like to discuss a little bit more, Janek, is actually, let me pause for a second here. Oh, we already covered a lot of this stuff directly. We didn't even have to go into it.
Okay. You mean the carbon credits for methane prevention and
Yeah,
EPR?
we covered all of this stuff already. I had like 4 questions, but I think we covered them all.
Okay. I think we went into a little bit on, apart from biochar, carbon credits for methane prevention,
Yeah. What?
and what data. You have also data and what the success look like. I don't know if this is
Yeah.
something
Yeah. So
you
let's
want
let
to.
me yeah, let me go back into it. So Yannick, we talked a lot about the importance of diverting waste from landfills and incineration, and how that is really at the core of building a zero waste economy. Um, and there are policy mechanisms that can be introduced, like extended producer responsibility on bio waste and other material streams, and that the combination of these can bring greater efficiency to the economy. But all of this really depends on corporations buying in, understanding that responsibility, and finding low cost ways to contribute. But all these policies really, in my understanding, they depend on having high quality data, traceability, so that you can apply and oversee an economy that is actually functioning fairly and well. And data quality has always been a problem in the waste industry. How do you see this playing out? And also, what do you see in terms of the roles of certification, say for zero landfill or zero incineration, the certification of these schemes? Where do you see that going?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't think we really know actually, how much, for example, is landfilled or even incinerated, or what exactly is incinerated. I think we more or less know uh, like the number of tonnages. Not necessarily we know what exactly is getting incinerated because it's um, there are no mandatory composition analysis. So this is something I'm happy that now the commission is working on, and they're considering making it mandatory to have. The question is like how often. So we are seeing different examples. In some places, it's kind of has become already a regular practice. And in our zero waste approach, actually, we are promoting having a kind of resource center where you look into the residual waste and constantly analyze and see like what are the products that end up in there, and then try to come up with policy solutions. So data is really, really important, and you need to have a proper data in order to take decisions in terms of like where to invest, right? So if you look at, for example, you do composition analysis and you see a lot of paper ends up in there, then you can, inform your decision making and address the issue. Otherwise, you don't know. You don't know what to do. You are just running around, without having a map in your at your hands. And it's also needed to have investors' trust, of course, in the system, and also any kind of claims, particularly around climate, they're often very weak if you don't have a proper data. So we are really focused on uh, trying to put in place proper data systems collection, and starting like how much do we generate, what are we generating, and how much of this is actually disposed in landfills, and so that we know and we can actually calculate the emissions. So just to give you an idea, and I think I talk about it at the COP also. um, Currently the way they calculate methane emissions, it's not that they're measuring. There's no way of measuring. There is currently no proper system of being able to calculate methane emissions directly. There is some promising development around satellites, but right now they also not really able to to give you the data, because it would require you kind of to have like daily measurements across the surface of landfills, and that's not happening. So what they do is that they look at like how much waste ends up in landfills, and then they calculate the emissions. So it's all calculated. So it's not that we really know like how much. It's just like you do the calculation, and then you what you capture, and then you see there is a cap, and then you see like, okay, probably something is not done properly because we're not capturing enough of methane, and then they try to improve maybe the capture. But I mean, the whole focus on trying to capture is quite flawed, because it's in the end it's better to divert that waste in the first place, so it doesn't end up in landfills, because once in the landfills, it's very difficult to know what happens to it, because landfills, they are it's very interesting. They are very dynamic. It's not like incineration, you burn and everything is coming out of stack. The landfills, they have a lot of hotspots. So you have today you have hotspots here, and it produces a lot of methane. Tomorrow it can be in a different area. So it's almost impossible to actually know what happens in landfills.
Yeah, I remember a report. I think it was released last year, a study from Harvard, I believe, and it said that even the EPA is underestimating by 50%
Yeah.
methane emissions at landfills. So it's a hard it's hard to get real good data on that. And speaking of data as well, and there's so much technology out there today, whether it's supply chain tracking or weighing waste at the source. I, I see a real opportunity in unlocking a lot of the climate financing and EPR mechanisms by actually identifying those waste generators or those sources of waste production that are actually being diverted to biological treatment. I know there are a couple incredible examples of pay-as-you-throw programs where they actually weigh everything at pickup,
Mhm.
and then
Yeah.
they're using AI to identify what's in that waste stream, penalizing users for not quality sorting. For example, I know that in South Korea they do weighing at the source, and basically it's functioning as a utility, right? So if you're a waste generator, now all of a sudden you're paying for the waste that you are producing. Well, that's a great incentive for me to reduce my waste production, right? And quality work. If we can digitize this entire system, quality work could then be rewarded and reduce those costs so that recycling and circularity in general can be cheaper than sending it to a landfill or to an incinerator. And so I see a lot of opportunities with data, but understanding that it's very difficult to do this, right? I mean, the system entirely needs to be integrated, and there are really no incentives largely around the world to do that. Very interesting, Janek. Thank you. And I think one last question. I'd love it to sort of open it up to you and say, what do you see success looking like for zero waste in the future for you? I mean, how do you envision us solving this problem? Where can we sort of like place our hat on in terms of a little bit of hope that we're going in the right direction and that we can really get to zero waste quickly globally?
Yeah. That's
A tough one.
yes. No, it's a good question. I mean, of course. So also within Zero Waste Europe, historically we talked a lot about better collection systems, more recycling, but we realized we really need to move up in the hierarchy, and we need to talk more about prevention and reuse. If you look at, like, particularly when it comes to households, because our movement, which we want to work with the people, and that's why we work with the municipal waste, with the households. So what we see is that we need to get back to where I started by saying, when in my childhood, we everything had a value and everything was local. I mean, I'm not saying that we cannot bring things from other countries, but yeah, we need to create this kind of get back to the reuse economy. That's how I see the future. That we will build a new infrastructure. We will start having a reusable packaging, for example. Even for the takeaway, you can still, it, not every day you have to cook at home. You can have a takeaway, but let's create a system so that the packaging for the takeaway, there is a way back for it, so that it can be washed and reused again. So I think the biggest sort of like movement and change will be around that, and particularly for the packaging waste. And packaging is the biggest fraction of waste. So I don't know how it is exactly where you are, but here in Brussels, I have, at home we have 5 different bags. We have paper; it's mostly packaging, you know. We have a plastics for the plastics and metals cans. It's also mostly packaging, and then you have, of course, you have the kitchen waste, and you have the one so-called mixed or residual waste. And so yeah, it's. I think if you start moving towards reusable packaging, that's where the big victory will come from and big changes will come from. And I think it's something that people should like, and I think they do like. They maybe need to we need to have some time to get used to it again. But if you put it together with DRS kind of fees, that if you bring back something and you get your money back, then there will be a strong incentive for people for doing so. For example, my children here in Brussels, they love bringing back and having some pocket money. So yeah,
That
it's
that was my experience. My experience was exactly that. I remember, visiting my grandfather in the United States, and we would have dump day, and on dump day we would put, because there was no collection, there was zero collection,
yeah.
so there was already all the composting that was needed was already done, because you're not going to put organic waste in the back of your car, right? And then
Mhm.
we would put all the recyclables in the back of the car, and we would go literally to a dump where we would sort out every single different fraction of waste. We would get little quarters back or dimes
Mhm.
back, which we could then use to buy things like, I remember very well buying baseball cards, and you would learn about different things, but it was really fun to get something in return for that. And it wasn't a problem. It wasn't like it was fun. And I
Mhm.
think that the maybe our convenience economy, today we look at waste as this horrible, ugly thing that can actually maybe can be beautiful if it's participatory, if you are learning about something that is bringing you together with a community. And so I have a very similar sort of background as you do with this, and I think that hopefully we can find ways of reintroducing this, and maybe in a modern way that's called gamification or whatever it is, whether it's deposit return schemes or any other mechanism.
Yeah,
We can make
exactly,
it fun, right? We can make it fun. Well,
exactly,
wonderful,
exactly.
wonderful, Janek. Is there anything else you think we missed today? I really appreciate this conversation. I'd love to leave it open to you.
Uh, I, I must say I didn't prepare for anything especially on that particular topic. So no, I think we are covered. I think we are covered. I no, I just I also when I talk about the future, I really see this kind of more communal living also for example bio waste. It doesn't need to end up in biogas facilities, or a lot of it can be managed in very locally. I'm very happy here in Brussels we have a lot of community composting sites where you can bring your kitchen waste, and you can get back compost once it's ready. And it's for free, so you don't have to buy anything. So I really like the idea of making this sort of like something that actually really benefits you. So, and I think we need to spend time on you know raising people's awareness about this, that waste is not something unwanted. It actually could almost become like a game, as you say, like gamification. You bring your thing and you get back something, so it becomes like a fun thing to do,
Yeah.
and I think that's the future for me.
Well, cool. I mean, here with me and my team at Carrot, I mean, we have a fundamental vision of the future, of the sustainable future, that can only be achieved through collaboration. And so, but that it must also be rooted in our individual responsibility, right? Each one of us has to do our part. So this collaborative effort, or the gamification, I think, is a really strong opportunity for us all. And you clearly, Janek, you and the work at Zero Waste Europe, you guys have owned it, have done so much for the space. So I just want to thank you for all that you do. You're a great communicator. You're spreading the word in a really positive way. So thank you for that. Thank you for your leadership, and for sharing your perspective. So thank you so much, Janek, for joining us. Really appreciate it.
thank you, Ian, and really, it's been also really great to have this conversation with you, and I'm looking really forward to hear more from about the work you do in Brazil and perhaps in some other places.
We'd love to collaborate, Janek. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you in the next episode. Thank you so